In our series of research tools for organizers. My name is Molly Gott, and I work with Little Sis, the organization putting on this training tonight. We're really excited to be here with y'all on what's probably a hot summer day for most everyone, and to talk about a really rich power research subject, which is researching nonprofits. And people were already put in the chat lots of nonprofits that you all are interested in researching. So like our past trainings, if you all have been on those, we'll be together for about an hour and a half. And I'm just going to do a quick kind of welcome and introduction thing to orient us right now. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of why we at Little Sis research nonprofits and kind of the role of nonprofit corporations in the power structure and kind of for the power elite. Talk about some examples, campaigning examples, and then really spend most of our time, Lauren and Rob, who are on with us, are going to run through kind of the go-to research tools for investigating nonprofits. So I think we'll be here for about an hour to an hour and a half that time. A couple of kind of housekeeping things before we get started. So we have the chat, which you all are in right now. That's great. Share things you're excited about in there, share information about nonprofits that you're researching in there. There's also a Q&A, and if you have particular questions, put them in there. And Munira, wonderful Munira, who's also doing the tech for this, will do her best to address them or make sure that we address them in some way. So chat is good for talking to each other. Questions should go in the Q&A. So just, I think it looks like a lot of the names are familiar to me that people have been on these sessions the last couple of times, but I just wanted to give people a little bit of context about who we are at Little Sis. So we're called Little Sis because we're the opposite of Big Brother, Little Sister. We're a watchdog research organization specializing in power research and mapping powerful people and organizations. What that actually looks like is we do that research ourselves, all of us. We also train in how to do that research, which is what this that y'all are on right now is part of. Kind of organizations, social movement organizations, the general public on the ins and outs of power research to kind of build research capacity in our movements. And then we also oversee some tech tools. So the main one is called littlesis.org. It's a free open source research platform. We sometimes call it an involuntary Facebook of the 1%. And it tracks relationships between powerful people, corporations, politicians, and also has a mapping tool called Alligrapher or Oligrapher, take your pronunciation, that lets you map power networks between powerful people, organizations, and corporations. So that's a little bit about us, and people should check out the website if you haven't. As part of our kind of commitment to training organizers and activists that are part of social movements in how to do power structure research, we're doing this series that you guys are participating in called Research Tool for Organizers. It's a free monthly training series. You can sign up for the rest of the trainings at this link that's on here. Right now, we're obviously on June 20th, the nonprofits one. Next month, our subject is going to be billionaires, kind of investing and digging into billionaire power networks. We'll be on break in August and then have 3 more this year that are going into money and politics, researching politicians, and researching corporate power formation. So definitely make sure to sign up for those. They're all going to be really great. A couple other things, like I said, use the Q&A for questions. Munira will do her best to answer. Sometimes, when there's a lot of people on these, the chat can get frantic. So just do your best to kind of keep questions pretty pertinent to what we're talking about in the webinar, and just be mindful to kind of let everyone talk in there. But I encourage you to use it. It's how we can all talk to each other on Zoom. We, like I said, these are open to the public trainings, and we try to make sure that all the materials are available to you all. You can scan this QR code. It'll come up at the end again to get the slide deck from tonight and also the slide deck from the previous trainings. We also are recording and have the previous recordings of the trainings on our YouTube, which you can get to by searching for Public Accountability Initiative. So everything that you guys see here tonight will be available afterwards. So don't worry about taking notes and all that. To get us started, I kind of just wanted to review, we'll probably do a little review like this at the beginning of every session. Just kind of some of the really core concepts we covered in the previous sessions, that give a little bit of context into why we're researching nonprofits, how we think about that work at Little Sis, and kind of what's the point of doing power research in a movement context. This is the definition of strategy that comes from this book, Practical Radicals, 7 Strategies to Change the World, that we've been kind of using as a little bit of a North Star in these training sessions. And the definitions that they share with us there is a plan to achieve a goal under conditions of uncertainty with limited resources facing opposition. And I think that everyone on this webinar, you guys were sharing in the chat already, are part of organizations or campaigns, social movement formations that have a strategy to win something, that you're trying to achieve a goal. Whether that, the whole host of things that you all were talking about in the chat. And one kind of part of that, in addition to these other things, is that we're facing opposition to win the world that we want, and that we deserve. And a key part of crafting a strategy is understanding that opposition, having a really deep understanding of what they want, who they are, and what we can do to win. So that's kind of the guiding principle of power research in this context, is that we are in a fight. We are trying to win a world we want to live in, and there are people, organizations that are standing in the way of it, and we need to understand who they are and how they operate, so that we can win. The other, of course, kind of word that I keep saying over and over again in talking about Little Sis's work is power. And the way we think about that is related to what I was just saying, the ability to make the world how you want it to be, even against opposition. And we've talked about in these last couple of webinars that we have different types of power, both, in our social movements, community organizations, labor unions, all of the kind of different groups that make up left social movements. And here's, again, from that same book, Practical Radicals, kind of different types of power that they define. So we have power, and our opposition also has access to those same types of power. And often we're contesting over which type of power we each have. We're trying to mobilize certain types of power, again, to win the world that we want. I'm not going to go super in depth into these different types of power, but there's more in previous webinars. But yeah, we're going to talk a lot today about kind of ideological power, as well as economic power, political power of our opponents, and kind of how to deepen our understanding of that so that we can deepen our strategy. The way we kind of think about this at Little Sis is that there is like a power structure, is what we call it, and a power elite that we are focused, that is our opposition, that we're focused on understanding and investigating. So this is like the people, organizations, and institutions that shaped the world as it currently is, who are benefiting from the status quo and who are standing in our way as we try to change it. So we call the overall structure of what's standing in the way the power structure, and it's dominated by a group of people that we call the power elite, and we're gonna get into that a little bit more. And yeah, to understand what that power structure is and who the power elite are, we do something called power research. And researching nonprofits is kind of one core part of that. We also always like to talk about that there's like a long history of this kind of research in social movements. This is an example. Again, if you guys are interested and didn't join for the first webinar, I'd really encourage going back and looking at that, from SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's research department, of how when SNCC set up field offices in towns, they would have like a very concrete set of research about who was making decisions in that place, so that they could campaign. And I think the other thing I just wanted to kind of like remind us all, particularly as we're getting into this nonprofit research, is that a lot of, there's different ways to kind of approach this research. And I think the core thing that we really think at Little Sis is that, as opposed to maybe research that's done for journalism or transparency's sake, we don't just want to find information. We want to figure out how to use that information to strategically weaken corporate power, to make it less possible for those people I was talking about, the power elite and the power structure, to kind of stand in the way of the things we're trying to win for our communities. And so we're going to come back to that idea again and again. Last time we talked about kind of the corporation, how to research private and public corporations that are set up and exist to make money for their investors, for their owners. This time we're going to talk about nonprofits, which are also a type of corporation, but are a bit different, and are not set up to make money, but are set up to do a bunch of other things. And nonprofits are kind of that category includes a whole host of different kinds of organizations. And the reason why we're talking about them all together is because they're the common set of kind of like financial disclosures and research tools that we use to investigate them and to understand their power networks. If people could maybe just kind of put in the chat real quick, like, when I say nonprofit organization, what different kinds of organizations come to mind? Feel free to throw some out there. You guys were already putting some in there as well. But yeah, it includes a whole host of things, and there's some examples on the slide of those things. So universities, yeah, someone's putting that there. Salvation Army, museums, industry trade associations. So things like, I have an example down here of the California Apartment Association. That's the landlord lobbying organization in California. That's a nonprofit. We have, think tanks, like the Heritage Foundation is on here. Chambers of Commerce we have up here. And then, big NGOs, big charitable foundations. This picture down here is a hedge fund manager, Paul Tudor Jones, at the Robin Hood Foundation, which is a big billionaire favorite charitable philanthropic fund. So all of these are nonprofits. They all do different things and kind of play a different role in the power structure. But like I said, they all have similar disclosures and similar kind of like legal regulations that they have to be accountable to. So that's why we're going to talk about them. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we wrap up too, but I just kind of wanted to, and people are already saying this in the chat, but I just kind of wanted to really clearly say, there's a lot of, like I'm saying, there's different nonprofits. They play different roles in the power structure. Some things for people to be thinking about, maybe what it looks like in the context of work or campaigns that you guys are doing. And as Lauren and Rob take us through the tools, these nonprofits sometimes are part of forwarding and obscuring the political and policy agenda of particular people and corporations. So for example, like the example I was saying, the California Apartment Association, they have sued over rent control and lots of tenant protections in California. They've poured hundreds of millions of dollars into fighting those tenant protections. And all of that money comes from large corporate landlords primarily, but they set up California Apartment Association to be kind of the front group to both move that policy agenda and then also make it so that the landlords themselves are not directly kind of responsible or connected with it. Similarly, like sometimes big corporations will set up charitable giving funds. So like the Mobil Foundation from ExxonMobil for many years funded universities and other civic groups that kind of pushed their agenda around climate and fossil fuels. We've got an example here of Jeff Yass, a big right-wing funder and hedge fund billionaire funding far right-wing Israeli think tanks. Other examples from that, like I saw some people in the chat saying things about like wanting to investigate kind of campaign finance and dark money. A lot of these nonprofit organizations are kind of dark money black boxes where corporations, people can give money to the nonprofit organization who then doesn't have to disclose as much information as they would otherwise. So again, kind of like forwarding a political agenda and obscuring. Also privatizing public services. So people were putting charter schools in the chat. Police foundations, these are two examples where we really see corporate money and billionaire money just like pouring in and flocking. So they're kind of like able to have corporations and billionaires exert more control over things that have typically been in the public domain, like schools and police departments. A lot of this nonprofit organizations and charitable giving also amounts to tax breaks for super wealthy people. And it's kind of like a long held strategy for billionaires and other super wealthy people to kind of park their money in charitable funds that are not taxable, to give charitable donations that count as tax deductions in ways that are strategic to reduce their tax bill. So there's also like a financial and kind of wealth hoarding incentive for the power elite to use these entities. And then also like reputation laundering, like pinkwashing or greenwashing. Here are some examples of utility companies that continue to burn fossil fuels, have been very resistant and unwilling to transition to clean energy, giving money to climate groups or environmental groups so that they can say like, look, we care about the environment, we're doing stuff, but we're not willing to change our business model. And then lastly, kind of social ties and prestige. So a lot of times these organizations, like this is from the Robin Hood Foundation again, being on the boards of universities, being on the boards of museums and other cultural institutions, are physical places and places where the power elite can kind of gather, network, etc. I'm going to skip this for now. Lauren, I'm going to hand it to you in a second, and you're going to take us through kind of the go-to source for looking at these nonprofits. But I just wanted to quickly also say that, you know, here's a little bit on kind of like what the different relationships or kind of research questions we might be interested in about a nonprofit are. So their leadership, who's on staff, who's on the board of directors, funding, where their money comes from. Is it from donors? Are there other revenue streams? What they're spending on? So like, is a particular nonprofit giving money as a grantor? Do they spend on, what do they spend on staff and board policies? What kind of programs, legal advocacy, all that kind of stuff, as well as their investments themselves. So like, do they have an endowment? Are there investment managers, etc.? And then consultants, like what are the other kind of networks of people that they rely on to keep their work going? So that could be PR, law firms, fundraising, lobbying, construction, a whole host of stuff. So I'm going to share it to Lauren to really jump into the specifics of how we find that info.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren. I'm a researcher also with Little Sis. I'm going to talk about one primary tool that we use, and then I'll pass it to Rob. All right. So let me, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide.
Oh, I stopped sharing and let
all right. I'll share the slides, my end.
Or I could share them, whatever's easier.
Let's see. Okay. Can everyone see this? Great. All right. So I'm going to try to walk us through over the next 20 minutes or so one super helpful tool, which is the Form 990. So the Form 990.
Oh, wait, Lauren, I think they can still see the like. Oh, wait, no, it's working. Okay, never mind. We're good.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Cool. So the Form 990 is the tax return for all of these nonprofits, these 501(c)s. It's filed with the IRS. And for organizations who have a revenue at or above $200,000, they have to fill out the whole long behemoth Form 990. For smaller organizations, smaller nonprofits, they can opt to fill out a shorter form, and very small organizations have to do even less. So we'll really be talking about these somewhat larger nonprofits with revenues at or above $200,000. And thankfully for us, ProPublica has put together this incredible tool called Nonprofit Explorer that really brings together all of these dense PDFs from the IRS into this really nice user-friendly interface where you can search. There's really great features. So I'm just going to be giving a demo of Nonprofit Explorer and pointing out some of the really helpful pieces of information within the Form 990 that we often turn to when we're doing research. Let me turn this off. Okay, so what's in a Form 990? Broadly speaking, it has great information like the revenue size of a nonprofit, their governance operations, their grant making activities. You can get really in the weeds with it, but really the anatomy of it is that it has this intro section where it has 12 different parts, a lot of yes and no questions that really kind of inform what else the nonprofit has to fill out. And nonprofits have to fill out up to 16 sections, also called schedules. And some of the key sections or schedules that we like to look at are this intro section, has a lot on the key officers, board members of the nonprofit, as well as compensation, number of employees, etc. Schedule C has their political activities and lobbying, if they are permitted to do so. Schedule D has information that can be particularly useful to like campus organizers, like endowments. Turn off my phone real quick. Oh, it keeps buzzing. As well as, information on donor advised funds and assets like land and buildings. Schedule I is a really important one, and it has a list of all the grant making activities of the nonprofit. And then Schedule J has more detailed information about compensation. And sometimes you'll also see a totally separate document in Nonprofit Explorer called the 990T, and that has information on private equity investments. All right, so let's pose a hypothetical question that actually is probably on a lot of our minds and definitely a focus of a lot of like campus organizers. So let's take Columbia University as an example to introduce ourselves to the 990 and pose this question. So what ties does Columbia University have to US militarism and climate disaster? So this is a huge question, big research question. Let's just take one small slice of it. Let's look into some, pretty introductory data points on Columbia University, like size, endowment, compensation of the president, who are their board members. Let's look at one board member, Jay Johnson. We'll go into and why he might be kind of important to focus on. And let's look at one related nonprofit, this think tank called the Council on Foreign Relations, and see how there's just connections among all of these three entities. Okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing and scoot over to Nonprofit Explorer. Let's try this. All right. Can everyone see Nonprofit Explorer?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So when you go to Nonprofit Explorer, which is at projects.propublica.org/nonprofits, you're going to see this homepage. If you scroll down, sometimes I miss this, so I like to point it out. They actually will provide nonprofits by state. And that could be super helpful if you're trying to fight a statewide campaign and just want to get a sense of who are the big players, the big nonprofits in your state. You can just click on your state and see, who are those nonprofits. So let's do that for New York. And here, we see in New York, which is common to a lot of other states, that the big nonprofits are health systems and universities. We see New York University, we see Cornell on there, and then here's Columbia. So let's click on Columbia. And this first page, I think, is really great. If we just focus on this revenue box, I think that's kind of a helpful figure. We can see the revenue that Columbia has reported over the past 10 years, 11 years or so, from 2011 to the last filing, which was in 2022. And we can see that in that most recent year for the filing, they had a revenue of $7.1 billion. So that's a quick, kind of helpful snapshot. If we scroll down a little bit, now we're getting to their most recent filing. The thing that I like to do is just click view filing and go right into it. All right, and this might take a second. Here we go. fear not. We will try to only look at highlighted lines. There's a lot here. But okay, so the first thing is in this part 1, as soon as you just land in this 990, they tell you how many employees. Columbia has 37,000 employees. And then they also reiterate this total revenue. So if we look at the current year, we see that number again, $7.1 billion. We also see the revenue in the prior year too. Great. So let's scroll down a little bit and check out compensation for some of the key employees. Sorry if anybody's getting dizzy here. Okay, we're almost there. All right, here we go. So here's a table, a summary table of the highest paid employees and also some board members. So we have here, the professor of surgery is the highest paid employee of Columbia at almost $6.5 million in reported compensation. And then we have former president Lee Bollinger at $3.3 million in compensation, you know, which could be very helpful to know. Could be helpful to know who else really tops the list in terms of compensation. And then if you keep scrolling down, we start seeing some of the board members, aka trustees. And this is a really nice starting point to then, you know, do your own research on each of these board members. There's a lot that, you know, Rob will be talking about some additional, you know, targeted Google searching that you can do. And so this is a really nice place to start to say, okay, who was on the board at the most recent filing? Let me start learning more about them. But for now, I just want to point out, here's Jay Johnson, trustee. We'll come back to him. All right. So that is the intro section. Let's now jump over to Schedule D to look at a couple pieces of information, or maybe just one piece of information. You can scroll down, and if we go to Part 5, here we go, we see more information about the endowment. So you'll notice that there's this table here. There's a couple years of information. So if you're trying to get the most recent year, it's in this column A, and you want to look at the end of year balance. So we see at the end of this filing year 2022, Columbia had an endowment of over $13.2 billion. Again, a helpful figure to just have in your back pocket to know as you're developing your campaigns. Okay. Let's go to two more sections in the Form 990. We'll talk about 2 additional features. So let's go to Schedule I. Schedule I is a great section that details the grant-making activities of the nonprofit. So you'll see here that these are any recipient, so any grantee that received more than $5,000. The left-hand column here is the name and address of the organizations receiving money. Then you have here column D, the amount that they received. And column H has a word or two describing the purpose of the grant. So there's a lot in here. This is generally, at least for this filing, is generally sorted by smallest grant to largest grant. So let's just scroll all the way down. I'm going to do this really fast. Okay, because there's a ton of grants in here. So we start getting into the millions. Okay, so we see that there's, you know, a grant to Johns Hopkins for $2 million, a couple other grants in the millions to other universities. And so, you know, this could be helpful information. This could be a good starting point to research a little bit more about, you know, what kind of partnerships do these entail? What kind of activities are being funded? If you think that you know of a separate entity that's being funded by Columbia and you think they might be in the list, you can always do a Control F and search for the name of that grantee in this list, see if they come up. That's always helpful to know. Okay, so that's grants. Let's jump to one other schedule and then hop out of the Form 990. Okay, we're gonna go to Schedule J. And we're gonna look at a little bit more detailed compensation information. Scroll down, and here we see a detailed table. Okay, so the first column I here, is their base compensation. You can see for the former president, their base compensation was $1.6 million. You can see a little bit more about their bonuses, other income, you know, benefits like retirement, and then, you know, how they're adding up the total of the columns. It's always nice to read, there's a narrative description that follows this table with a little bit more information about, you know, what could be baked into some of those numbers. So I always, you know, encourage everyone to just read this. Sometimes you find even, you know, additional interesting information like spouses have their travel covered, or there's other stuff in there too. Okay, so we went through intro section, schedule D, I, and J. Let us take a breath and pop back to, okay, the homepage. So we just learned about Columbia. Let's learn a little bit more about Jay Johnson. Nonprofit Explorer has a nice search where you can search on the name of a person. So if we search for Jay Johnson, who, just to remind us all here, is one of the trustees of Columbia, let's see if his name comes up as being affiliated with any other nonprofits. We'll click that. We'll say the most last couple years. Apply that filter. Okay, yep, so he's coming up for Columbia. He's a trustee, or was a trustee, in Newark Public Radio. Fun fact, he's also a host. He has a radio show in WGBO, I think. And we also see, if we keep scrolling, that he's also a director at the Council on Foreign Relations. All right, so the council, well, let me first say something about Jay Johnson, just to back up a little bit and put this in a little bit of context why I'm focusing on him. So Jay Johnson, he's the former Secretary of Homeland Security in the Obama administration. I know from separate research, he's also, you know, on the board of Lockheed Martin, who's the largest defense contractor. He's also on the board of US Steel, a major supplier to the oil and gas industry. He's a partner at Paul Weiss, which is notorious. It's a law firm notorious for representing fossil fuel corporations. And so Jay Johnson is interesting to kind of do research into because he has long, you know, deep connections to industries of war, fossil fuel industry, and has a considerable amount of influence and power. So, you know, like, I think if we're trying to tease out this top level research question, it's like, he's an interesting person to kind of look into a little bit more. So that's the context a little bit for Jay Johnson. Sorry, I kind of put that towards the end. But here we are now, having learned that he's also director on this think tank, Council on Foreign Relations, which is kind of seen as the premier neoliberal think tank that sets foreign policy agenda for the US and historically has done so for many decades. It has a really exclusive membership full of high-ranking government officials, members of Wall Street, you know, media figures, CEOs, big multinational corporations. So it's really this like confluence of the power of the ruling elite. And so it's interesting to know who's on the governing board of it, and also what other institutions may the Council on Foreign Relations be connected to. So let's see who, you know, let's see who funds the Council on Foreign Relations. Unfortunately for us, 501c3s don't have to list their donors. They don't have to list who funds them. But we learned before that, you know, that nonprofits have to list who they give money to. They just don't have to list who they receive money from. So let's try to use a tool on Nonprofit Explorer to kind of tease that out and kind of back into that. One thing that we can do is use this filing text feature to search for the Council on Foreign Relations. We'll select the last year. And we'll say, you know, which nonprofits give grants to the Council on Foreign Relations? And that information would be in a Schedule I. So let's look for Council on Foreign Relations in the Schedule I. And apply that. Okay. So we see that they show up, probably receive grants from the Leland Stanford Junior University, from a couple corporate charities, a couple other foundations. And if I keep scrolling, I think it'll be there. There we go. Columbia is also on this list. All right, so Columbia gives money to the Council on Foreign Relations. Jay Johnson is director of Columbia and the Council of Foreign Relations. I hope we're all following these breadcrumbs. I'm so sorry if it's a little convoluted, but this is the last piece that I just wanted to show. We search this, Council on Foreign Relations, we can see that they got a grant from Columbia for $250,000. Okay, so we've kind of connected some of these dots. Again, this is maybe just a starting point. We want to do a little bit more research to really tease this out and see what are the deeper ties among, you know, these organizations and people, what are the nature of the relationships, but we're starting to piece together some information there. I'm going to stop sharing, go back to our slides, and do a really quick recap before I pass it over to Rob. So if you take away anything from this, it's that the Form 990 is really the forum to look at for nonprofits. You can do a lot with ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer. Hopefully I was able to show you just a couple sections where you can find some information. We'll be including screenshots of this, you know, in the slides that you can always refer back to. And with the 990, there's a lot of great information, like we looked at endowments, grants, compensation. The person search is a great tool to see what other nonprofits a given person might be also associated with. And then the filing text search is a way for you to search for a given nonprofit and see who might be giving grants to that nonprofit. Okay, I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Rob.
All right, thanks, Lauren. And maybe we can, if either you or Molly can bring up the slide deck, I can talk about some other, some other tools that we can use, or other sort of techniques we can use to research nonprofits. And, you know, I guess, you know, what I would say is that these are, I'm going to be talking about, you know, how to do this stuff sort of specifically within the context of nonprofits, but, you know, what I'm talking about in this section is really, you know, applicable to basically any research topic. And, you know, some of these things may seem probably a little sort of obvious, especially to the folks who are already involved in campaign research. But, you know, I think it's a good idea to always kind of like go over some of these things, and you know, maybe you know, if you are kind of, you know, familiar and, you know, feel comfortable with, you know, doing like web and news searches, you might still pick up a couple other techniques in here. So yeah, just generally, you know, web searches are going to be a great starting place for any power research project. You know, that's going to take you kind of directly to, in the context of a nonprofit, you'll probably find the organizational website, news searches that mention the organization. And, you know, we can use search engines like Google or DuckDuckGo, or, you know, whichever one you know, feel most comfortable with, to do some more targeted searches to you know, search for information either within specific websites, or sort of within specific you know, top level domains. You know, for example, you can search for information only in sites where the name of the website ends in .edu or .org, for example. We can also use some of these advanced search tools to find specific types of documents, whether those are PDF files, spreadsheets, Word documents, things like that. The last thing I want to say before I move to the next slide is that, with web searches, this can sort of be like a fishing trip. You're definitely not guaranteed to find what you're looking for. In fact, you may find that information that was that once was there is not anymore. It's still a good practice to sort of start a power research project with these kind of web searches. It can provide like a good foundation for, some of the more in-depth research using tools like Nonprofit Explorer, using campaign finance databases. But, with web searches, we can sort of get a good foundation into, some of the more general information about a nonprofit, like, who are the sort of publicly facing people who represent the organization. How does the organization see itself? What is the face that they try to sort of provide to the public? So first I'm going to start talking about using organizational websites, and the different types of things we can find there. If we can go to the next slide, please. Some of the top stuff you're going to find on an organizational website are going to be information about the leaders and the key decision makers at the organization. You can find information about, again, how the organization is governed, but also you know the different policy priorities that they have, um events that they might be putting on. And again, this is going to be sort of a window into how the organization perceives itself, and maybe even more importantly, how it wants to be perceived by others. So the example I have on here is the board of trustees of the Manhattan Institute, which is a right-wing think tank headquartered in New York City, really dominated by financial elites. You can see here the chairman is Paul Singer from the hedge fund Elliott Management. We have another hedge funder, Roger Hertog, on the board. Other board members also come from, it's really sort of overwhelmingly dominated by financiers, investment managers, but also has representation from the sort of general kind of like corporate elite in New York City and New York State. For example, Kathy Wild, the CEO of the Partnership for New York City, another nonprofit that is sort of like a chamber of commerce type organization, also sits on the Manhattan Institute board. We can go to the next slide here to go sort of deeper. So one thing you're going to be really interested in when looking at an organizational website is the bios of their board members. And you can see here, actually, for this example, I chose Roger Hertog, the chairman emeritus at the Manhattan Institute. And this, is also sort of an illustration of, some of the limitations of, only doing your research by these web searches and only relying on organizational websites. The actual chairman, Paul Singer, doesn't have any bio at all. His bio on the Manhattan Institute website is totally blank. So if you are, looking into the Manhattan Institute, you're going to want to check these bios. For where you see blanks, this is going to be, a lead on more research that you're going to want to do. And maybe as a quick sort of plug for our next session on researching billionaires, um, there are a host of tools that you can use to really dig deeper into sort of individual people. But the types of stuff that we can find from an organizational bio will start to show the connections that the nonprofit you're looking at has to other institutions, whether they're nonprofits, whether they're the government, whether they're for-profit companies, because a lot of them will be listed right here in the bio. So it talks here about Hertog's roles at Sanford Bernstein and Co. Before its merger with Alliance Capital, then eventually sort of became Alliance Bernstein. It also talks about where Hertog went to college, For the power elite, these sort of college connections can be really important. This is something that we've seen illustrated, I think very clearly in some of the elite activism that has been happening around pro-Palestine protests at colleges, across the US, now across the world. We've, had a lot of news stories about, alums and donors to these universities exerting, a huge amount of pressure on the universities themselves, but also the cities where they're located to crack down on these protests. So, it says here, mentions here that Hertog is an alumnus of City College in New York. It also talks about some of his roles at other nonprofit organizations, like another, right-wing corporate think tank, the American Enterprise Institute, as well as some cultural organizations, New York Philharmonic, New York Public Library, Thomas Jefferson Foundation, and some of the awards that he's gotten as well. By starting here, we can start to build out a picture again of who are the people at this organization, what else are they connected to, what else do they care about. We can supplement, where the organizational website itself doesn't have that information for us. We can supplement that with, further research into these people. We can go to the next slide now, and I'll talk about events. So, looking at the events that a nonprofit organization puts on, may not seem like a particularly important research area, but it can be super helpful again in, discerning, what the organization's priorities are, what they're sort of trying to put out into the world, what kinds of things are they hosting. I think, maybe to put a finer point on it, looking at these events can also kind of show who the nonprofit does business with by seeing, where these events are being held. Can also show, who are in the sort of extended network involved in advancing this organization's agenda by looking at the people that are, sort of featured at these events. So you can see here at the this is from last month, the Alexander Hamilton Award dinner brought together, a bunch of people in the Manhattan Institute orbit, including Paul Singer, the chairman, again, hedge fund manager at Elliott Management. We've got Ross Perot Jr. I'll cop to not having done full amount of power research on Ross Perot Jr., though I'm very familiar with his father, who famously ran as a independent candidate in 1992 for president. Then you've got Douglas Murray, the famous I think sociologist and author of The Bell Curve, which is a text that's been used to sort of justify all kinds of racist social policy. I think, another example of one, you may be very interested in the events that a nonprofit is putting on is if you're planning some kind of direct action where you want to, maybe confront the managers of this organization on territory where they may not be expecting to have some kind of a confrontation or be challenged about, what they're involved with. We can go to the next slide. And yeah, so this is going to be some more kind of just general web search tips here. Again, probably familiar to a lot of you if you're already sort of involved and, doing campaign research. But, always, I think it's always, helpful to kind of go over some of these again. We generally hit on a few of these pretty much in pretty much every one of these trainings that we put on. But, I think the number one, search engine tip has got to be putting search terms in quotes. By putting a phrase in quotes, that is going to ensure that your results are only going to include pages that have that whole phrase together in them. So if you're searching, for example, for a nonprofit board member named Henry Philanthropist, you're going to want to put that in quotes. So you're finding only results that have those two words right next to each other. So you're not finding, every web page that mentions the name Henry and the name philanthropist, far apart from one another. You can kind of go like a next step from there. You can put these search terms together and including like whole phrases like that. So for example, if you wanted to know where else the Manhattan Institute chairman Paul Singer sits on the board, you could do a search for Paul Singer in quotes and then trustees in quotes to find every website that mentions the name Paul Singer as well as trustees. Next, there's a they're called search operators, which are basically they're sort of like um, phrases that you can insert when you're writing your search terms into the little box on Google or whatever you're using to tell that search engine to only look in specific places or to only look for specific things. So one super helpful search operator that we use all the time at Little Sis is the site search operator. And you can use that in a few different ways. So for example, if you wanted to find every page on the Manhattan Institute website that mentions Paul Singer, you could do this. You could write site SITE colon Manhattan.institute, and that is just that is the URL. So if you wanted to search only within the Little Sis website, you would do site colon littlesis.org. So if you do site Manhattan.institute and then Paul Singer again in quotes there, you're going to find every page on the Manhattan Institute website that mentions Paul Singer. You could also do this, for example, with you could do site .edu and Paul Singer, and then that's going to search for the name Paul Singer, but only on websites that have a .edu top level domain, which is limited, I think, pretty much exclusively to educational institutions. Another search operator that can be really helpful, again, depending on the context of your campaign, the context of the research that you're trying to do, is called file type. The file type search operator can be super helpful if you want to find, for example, copies of flyers or maybe white papers or other documents that have been uploaded to the web in a specific file format. So I use file type PDF a lot, and I'll combine that with the site search operator. So I might do like file type PDF and then site Manhattan.institute to find every publicly available a PDF file that's on that website. You can frequently find stuff on websites that the webmasters may not have intended to make public, but still possibly accidentally did, that then got indexed by a search engine. You can also find things like Word documents or Excel spreadsheets. This can again, it sort of depends on the campaign context you're looking for, you're looking in, but with PDFs frequently you're going to get you're going to find like white papers or maybe flyers for specific events. It's possible you may find documents like grant proposals or things like that, though. I mean, that's really like a lot less common than now. At this link here at googleguide.com/advanced _operators _reference.html, this is a list of all of the different search operators that you can use with Google. Google sort of being the sort of hegemonic player in search engines. They sort of set the standard that I'm pretty sure most major search engines have followed since then. So even though this is on a website called Google Guide, you can use a lot of these operators in pretty much any search engine that you're going to be using. The last thing I want to talk about is the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. This is a really, really incredible tool that you can use to find old versions of websites. This is super helpful to see. You can sort of see through time how websites have changed. One thing that we've noticed in a lot of our research is that when a particular organization starts facing more scrutiny from the public, more scrutiny from organized people over activities, especially if they're finding specific managers and board members being publicly criticized for the organization's activities, they will go and they will try to strip as much information as they can off of their website. This is something we noticed, I think, you know, very specifically with a lot of police foundations. We've been reporting on police foundations for several years now, and one thing we found is that back when we started looking at this sort of very specific slice of the nonprofit sector, these foundations were, you know, very proud of their corporate affiliations and their corporate donors, and they would have their big corporate logos very prominently listed on their websites, and they would also, you know, name their whole board of directors on their website. What we found is that as people started paying more attention to what these foundations do, how they are, you know, funneling private money into local police pardon me, local police departments, and these donors and board members then started, you know, kind of coming under the microscope themselves. A lot of these police foundations sort of snapped into action to pull a lot of this information off of their websites in order to try to, you know, make it less accessible, make it, you know, a little bit less transparent, try to avoid some of this scrutiny that they've come under. This is where the Wayback Machine can be super useful, because you can go back and look at their website back before they changed it to see, you know, who they named as corporate donors, who they named as their board members in previous years. Next, I'm going to talk through a couple specific campaign examples that that have used research into nonprofit organizations. The first one I'm going to talk about is in New York State, where I'm based. The real estate industry is, you know, like in most places, but I think, you know, especially you know, in New York, which is sort of the you know, the nucleus of really global capital, and where, you know, real estate values are, you know, just so astronomically high. The real estate industry is, you know, really profoundly influential on state and local politics. So we did a report back in 2022 with the Housing Justice for All Coalition, looking at specifically at the power of New York's real estate industry, specifically three lobbying organizations: the Real Estate Board of New York, the Community Housing Improvement Program, and the Rent Stabilization Association, and how those organizations have, you know, spent millions of dollars on pretty sophisticated political influence operations in order to try to block or, you know, block and water down tenant protections in New York State. This report, you can see the cover of it here on the slide. Thanks for pulling that up. This this report sort of we released it in 2022 in the legislative fight around good cause eviction protections, and we used you know, really a lot of their the 990s for all of these organizations to report on the amount of money they spent on law firms suing to overturn various tenant protections in New York State. We found the boards of directors of these organizations using their 990s, and then, you know, with the names of their board of directors in hand, we looked up who those board members were giving money to across the state. So we reported on how the people running these lobbying organizations were, you know, funneling campaign money from, you know, where they lived in New York City, the Hudson Valley, Long Island, to legislators really across the state. We also looked at the names of the different related organizations that these lobbying groups named in their 990s, and then, you know, connected them to these, you know, very opaque front groups. The one we really focused on in this report was called Homeowners for an Affordable New York. And by finding the connections between these lobbying organizations and this front group that sort of emerged out of nowhere and started spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on, you know, campaign mailers and ads and things like that, trying to drum up sort of popular opposition to good cause eviction. um we were able to really sort of explicitly show the connection there. And so I think this is a good example, because in this report we used a lot of information from sort of all over their 990s, as well as sort of other power research techniques like campaign finance research, lobbying research, to show really how much money was being put into this operation that included, like I said, political influence, front groups, as well as higher spending millions of dollars on lawyers to try to sue to overturn things that had been already passed. um and this has been this, I guess, the campaign that 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 sort of drove this report, I guess, saw I would call it a qualified win this year with the passage of a good cause bill in New York State that was, I think, heavily compromised at the last minute by the legislature and the governor, but still was basically an advance. The needle has moved. And these, I think, putting out reports like this really sort of help to really cement what the real estate industry was up to in New York State, and start to sort of inoculate against a lot of their tricks and techniques, because they rely on the same playbook year after year after year. The other example I'm showing here is this. It's, I guess it's a little bit hard to tell just from this photo, but this is a photo of a bunch of the different corporate sponsors of the Atlanta Police Foundation, which had really sort of drew a lot of attention as they started moving forward with the Cop City project in Atlanta, Georgia. Um, Campaigners who were opposed to Cop City, saw that this project was being, primarily driven, sort of not exclusively by the government of Atlanta, though there was absolutely sort of coordination and complicity there. But the actual money behind this thing was coming from the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a privately incorporated nonprofit that raises millions of dollars from huge corporate donors, and then funnels that money into the police department. And we've done a report on police foundations with the group Color of Change that sort of explains in kind of broad strokes how these police foundations work. Again, channeling money from some of these private corporate donors to police departments to do all sorts of things, whether it's huge capital projects like Cop City, or buying weapons, armor, sort of technological devices like drones and stuff for police departments, to funding, in the case of the New York Police Foundation, funding a sort of globally spanning intelligence operation. But coming back to the Atlanta Police Foundation, campaigners in Atlanta, opposed to Cop City, started to pull the lens back away from just APD and the government, to show how this project was being driven by all of these huge corporate donors, and raising the question of when corporations are spending millions of dollars to build urban warfare simulator for police departments, what does that do, either consciously or subconsciously, to policing priorities? Does that start to give the ultra rich and sort of the corporate world basically input into what the police are doing, and what their activities are, and what degree of violence are they going to wield against the communities that they've policed? um the both of these campaigns are still ongoing. With the Cop City example, very shortly after we reported on all the corporate donors to the Atlanta Police Foundation, the Coca-Cola company, which is pretty much, maybe the most important corporation headquartered in Atlanta. Maybe Delta is up there, but Coca-Cola Company actually pulled out of the Atlanta Police Foundation after they started to attract some attention uh, due to their previous relationship with it. Yeah, those are the examples I wanted to talk through. So I think I'm going to hand it back to Molly now.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I think this is we're mostly coming to the end here of what we wanted to talk about tonight. I did want to say we mentioned this before, but as I said, this is part of a training series, and our next one is going to be on July 18th. And it's about researching billionaires. It's going to be a really fun, good one. So I wanted to encourage folks to join for that. And then we're also halfway through this series, and it's the first time we've done it kind of in this way. So I think we wanted to just do a quick poll of people that I think Manira is gonna launch. Manira, could you do that? Just to get a sense of kind of how today's training was for folks. So yeah, if people could just kind of answer that right now, that would be amazing. I'll give like a couple minutes. And we're also gonna send around like a more in-depth survey sometime in the next week or so to people who've been on these trainings to hear a little bit more about kind of like what you're looking for out of them, what it could look like next year as we continue to build this into kind of maybe like a 2.0 set of skills. Yeah, we really want to be responsive to kind of the folks who've been on these and what the needs are for the campaigns you're working on. So I'll be quiet for a second and let people respond to that. Wow, people are really filling it out. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. I'll give you like another 2 minutes or so. Okay, cool. It looks like people are done filling it out. Manira.
Maybe we'll give everyone 30 more seconds.
Okay,
just
cool.
to finish up
30
their
more
thoughts.
seconds.
Thanks everyone for taking the time to respond. I'm gonna end the poll now.
Awesome. Thank you, Manira. Cool. Thanks, everyone. The one other thing that I wanted to respond to also, that was some talk in the chat and the question that I skipped over for time was questions about kind of like different kinds of nonprofits legally. And again, we'll share the slides so you guys can have this, but there was a slide in here that's talking about, yeah, there's different types of like legally set up nonprofits that you guys have probably heard of. 501c3s, 501c4s, 501c6s. They all kind of have a little bit of different rules and regulations around them about whether or not they can participate in political activity and kind of how they're structured. So that's one thing I wanted to point out for folks. And if people have more questions like that or kind of other questions, we have lots of other resources. So you can go to mapthepower.net. That's kind of like our big toolkit of how to do power research. We've done previous trainings that are relevant to some of the questions we were talking about tonight. This is one I wanted to highlight. It's on our YouTube page. Again, if you search Public Accountability Initiative, it was about war profiteers on campus and researching corporate backers of war and militarism, and the attacks on Gaza that are happening at colleges and universities. So people can check out more kind of nonprofit research there. And then this is the link again for the slides. They're all there from this week and the last two sessions that we did.
Hey, Molly.
Yeah.
Can I jump in? I'm sorry. There was one more question that I think would be good to answer live. And that somebody asked about information on nonprofits with less than $200,000 in revenue. The answer to that is that there's two other sort of variations on the 990 that organizations can file. So if an organization has less than $50,000 in revenue, it's called like I think it's called like a postcard 990 or 990N. It's basically it's it's a really short document that just lists some very like basic information about the organization. And then there's another one called the 990EZ that is for organizations with revenues between $50,000 and $200,000. Again, this one is, it's kind of like the Goldilocks Mama Bear 990. It has more than the 990N, less than the full 990. So for those organizations, you can get some information, but not in nearly the level of like depth and granularity. Also, I think churches came up in the chat at one point too, and this is like one example where they are organized as 501c3s, but for the actual church itself, you're not going to get that public 990 that you get for other organizations. Though I will mention for a lot of larger churches that have activities outside of just like their ministry, they'll form housing organizations or separate charities or things like that you can find information to sort of come more obliquely at information about church leadership through their sort of other nonprofit affiliates.
Cool.
And I'm done. Back to the program. Sorry.
No, perfect. Thank you, Rob. Yeah, and if there's other questions that you guys are trying to figure stuff out, feel free to reach out to us. My email address is here. Again, check out our YouTube, our newsletter, our Instagram, our Twitter. And we're always kind of around to help people troubleshoot research questions as they're coming up, kind of just like the couple of things we were just talking about. So I think that's all for tonight. We do these trainings for free and are really committed to doing that. So if you're interested in donating so we can keep doing this work and for the next 3 sessions and hopefully into the future, please donate to littleassist.org/donate. And yeah, I think that's all for tonight. Thanks you all for joining us. And thank you to Rob and Lauren for sharing such awesome tools. And we'll hopefully see you all in the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Molly.